Check. There we go. All right. Sorry, we didn't have Grady working the cameras for YouTube tonight, so we were making sure that those all worked. So, good evening. Welcome back. I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. Let's see. My phone's going crazy. So, as we get back into apologetics, I don't know how many of you have heard my testimony of how I became a Christian, but if you have or have not, I'm going to fill you in. So as I was running around as a wonderful little agnostic heathen, I used to treat God as a genie. I know, not the best way, but I didn't know God at this point in my life. And I would only pray to him if I wanted something, right? Because I thought he was my genie. And it came to the day that I really wanted a really cool job. And since I was going to pray for this job, I thought, it was an airline job, I thought, well, maybe I should pray correctly, because in the airlines, we always follow procedure. Procedure, procedure, procedure. Checklist, compliance, SOP, procedure, procedure, procedure. I really want this job. So if I'm going to pray to God, maybe he has a procedure. So where do I look in aviation to fly the airplane? The manual. So where am I going to look to pray to God? The manual, the Bible. And of course, I turn to the Lord's Prayer and I see this stuff like, forgive me my sins as I forgive others who've sinned against me, or trespasses, depending on your translation, which we'll talk about tonight. And I sit here thinking to myself, I'm not a sinner. Remember, I'm agnostic, right? And I'm like, sure, I mess up here and there, but I'm a good guy. I don't need forgiveness of sins. I need a job. This thing's worthless. This Bible is junk. This procedure doesn't work. Oh, I know why it doesn't work. Because the Bible is a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. It's been manipulated by leaders through thousands of years to control the sheep. You can't trust the Bible. But because I had this thought, I figured I like to investigate things. I want to prove how much you can't trust the Bible. And as I dug into it, I found the opposite was true. The Bible's highly reliable. You can trust the Bible. And I'm going to start off with giving you guys an example. You may have heard this once before. 77 years ago, our forefathers brought forth a country known as Gettysburg Address. We do not have the original Gettysburg Address that Abraham Lincoln wrote. We don't actually know what he said. I bet many people didn't know that. But we have 90% accuracy through looking at soldiers' diaries, newspaper clippings, and other forensic techniques, and we have 90% accuracy in knowing what Abraham Lincoln said. Sure, he could have said 80 years ago or 8 decades and 7 years ago. They would have all meant the same thing, but we're pretty sure that it was 80. And there's a way of doing forensic science that you come up with this. And we're 95% sure that what Abraham Lincoln had said, almost 200 years ago, is what we know as the Gettysburg Address today. 95% accuracy. That's really good in the field of history. When it comes to the Bible, we are 99% accurate that the Bible we have today or at least with the New Testament, is the same New Testament that was originally written 2,000 years ago. Think of that difference. Think of how corrupted the Gettysburg Address got in 200 years, and the technology that was available, and we have 95% accuracy, and historically, we're really happy with 95% accuracy. But the Bible maintains 99% accuracy, and it's been over 2,000 years. That's pretty amazing. In fact, that's beyond possible. But yet, that's what we have today. And that's what I discovered as I transitioned from agnostic to Christian. And so we're going to get into that. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with the internet age, the pastor would like to ask a question about my testimony.
Was that one of the, as you researched it, is that one of the things that led you to Christ when you
Yeah, he asked if that's one of the things that led me to Christ. And once I saw that the Bible was reliable, that built the foundation. And if anybody's ever read Matthew 7:24, a wise man builds his house on a foundation, a foolish man builds it on a sand. I'm pretty sure it's 7:24. We didn't rehearse it, so I may be off on my scripture. But anyhow, that was the foundation upon which I started to build my house known as my faith in Christ. And once my first assumption was shattered, the Bible's a copy of a copy of a copy, you can't trust it, and that turned out to be shattered. The thing that I thought and believed, my own personal convictions were shattered by the truth. I was left in this world of what Pontius Pilate once said, what is truth? And now I'm in this world of I have to search for truth. And that led me to other questions. And we may talk about some of these, because right now we're talking about reliable transmission.
I just think that's interesting because your testimony follows along the lines of like Lee Strobel and what was the guy's name in the 70s? Apologetics guy. Anyway, he did the same thing. He set out to disprove the Bible, and by trying to disprove it, realized it was the truth, and it turned his life around. Nikki, you should know his name. Josh McDowell, that's it.
Yep.
Josh McDowell. That's right.
That's true.
Yep.
So it's, I don't know, just your testimony. It's interesting to me the amount of people that set out to disprove it and discover its truth, and then the foundation is laid for them to come to Christ. That's interesting.
Okay, and for the YouTube, Ken just said he's found it really interesting that the number of people that set out to disprove the Bible and end up licking their wounds, so to say, because if you give it an honest chance, and he was referencing like Lee Strobel, Josh McDowell, another person mentioned C.S. Lewis. The Bible has withstood every attack anybody's ever thrown against it, and we're going to see why tonight. And by the way, I've been studying this for years now, and we're only going to scratch the surface. We're not going to get into contradictions, archaeology, many other segues that we could go down. We're just going to look at some very basic stuff. And this may take 2 weeks just to touch the surface. So for those of you that are not into the internet jargon, TLDR, too long, didn't read. The Bible's 99% the same today as what it was 2,000 years ago. So there you go. That's what I'm going to argue for tonight. And if you're curious, my slides do look different. I also now belong, and I have for a few years, to Reasonable Faith, led by William Lane Craig. I'm one of the chapter directors. Right now I'm at large. I was the Phoenix chapter director. And so these are some of the slides that we use when we do professional presentations to big groups. These are my slides though, but anyhow, so that's why they do look a little different. So but before we get into these objections, I do want to cover a couple definitions tonight. Manuscript, generally abbreviated MS or MSS for multiple manuscripts. And it's a handwritten document. That to be a manuscript, it has to be written by hand. Anything after the Gutenberg press is not a manuscript, it's printed. And this is really important because of the scribal transmission that we go through. An autograph is an original manuscript. Now, in antiquity, back in like first century Israel, and an autograph doesn't have to be written by the person that signs it, such as Paul used to scribe a lot of his letters. But the reason we called it an autograph is typically the scribe would do 2 copies, the autograph and the original. And the autograph, whoever wrote it or scribed it would sign it, and then the original was a copy of the autograph. So usually you had the autograph and the original for the 2 first copy manuscripts. And so sometimes you'll hear people say original, sometimes you'll hear them say autograph. For the most part, those 2 terms are interchangeable because they're both considered originals. Now, can we prove that every manuscript was signed? No, we cannot. That's an argument from silence. But the custom was always to sign one of them. So it's pretty, for the most part, it's assumed that there was always an autographed manuscript. Sometimes we call things extant manuscripts. These are really old manuscripts that still are around today. And we'll talk about some of those. What? Codex. A codex or a codice. So a lot of times they would write on a scroll for just one book. And as they learned to bind papyri, they would make what we would call a book. So for the nation of Israel, like Genesis was its own scroll most times. Now sometimes they would do the whole law on one scroll if they had enough money for a piece of papyri long enough. But as technology changed, they learned how to write, take the Gospel of Matthew, the Gospel of Luke, the Gospel of Mark, and the Gospel of John, and bind them together. And that would form a codex. And then a codice is multiple codexes put together. So sometimes we say codex, sometimes we say codices. It depends on the binding method is what that comes down to. But typically, whenever we're referring to like the Codex Vaticanus, the Codex Sinaiticus, or the Codex Alexandrinus, we're referring to a complete New Testament. And those are extant manuscripts, so they're still around. They're very, very old. And we're going to talk about how those play into biblical reliability. But that's what a codice is basically when they bound a lot of old papyrus together. So, and the last word I want to talk about it's an idea. It's called a priori. It's a Latin term. And basically, just saying priori means prior, something like that. And this is good for apologetics in two different ways. Say a person says, can you give me 100% evidence? No, I cannot. That's the simple answer. And that's because people have a priori beforehand determined their conclusion, right? No matter what evidence I give them, they're not going to change their mind. A naturalist has a priori beforehand, prior, determined that there is no evidence for the supernatural. So it doesn't matter what evidence I give them, they're going to reject it, no matter how good it is. Can you give me 100% evidence for the resurrection of Christ? Yes, I can. Jesus died by Pontius Pilate. No, he didn't. See how they just rejected my evidence? A priori, because their naturalistic worldview refuses to accept something supernatural. So any evidence I give, they're just going to reject. And then sometimes a priori can also just be used to state the obvious, right? Like sometimes things are so obvious that I just don't need to prove it. Like it's a priori knowledge that we all breathe oxygen. Do I really need to sort all my sources and prove that we all need oxygen to live? No, we all know this, right? So these are some terms that I may or may not use tonight. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But the whole idea when I do use these is to understand that they can be used in two different ways. And like when somebody does say, can you show me 100% proof of something for the Bible? Can you show me 100% proof that Jesus resurrected? No, I can't. But usually my answer is, do you live your life by 100% proof? And some people, yes, I do. Really? So like, you know, when you open up a can of Coca-Cola, you prove it's actually Coca-Cola in there with their secret recipe that nobody knows? You just don't open it and drink it trusting that it's Coca-Cola? You take 100% proof that it's actually Coca-Cola in that can? Nobody does that. You don't take it to the chemist and go, hey, analyze this, tell me it's Coca-Cola. That's ridiculous, right? Nobody lives by 100% proof. When you get your drugs from the pharmacy, like your prescription, right? Do you go to the pharmacist and go, give me 100% proof that this is my medication? No, the pharmacist hands it to you and you take it by faith that that's the correct prescription. You know, when you go to Taco Bell and you order a bean burrito, you take it by faith that it was made correctly and it weighs the exact amount that the directions call for that you're paying for. You don't take it to scale and dissect it before you eat it. Nobody lives by 100% proof. And so anybody asking for 100% proof a priori that the Bible's true, we can present some really good facts, but at the end of the day, if somebody's asking for 100% proof, these are good facts, they're still not going to accept it. And that's kind of my point. But usually I like to point out to them, like, you prove to me, give me 100% proof that you live your life by 100% proof. Once you do that, I'll give you 100% proof for the Bible. But as I've said, the Bible's withstood 2,000 years of assaults, and it still stands. So as we go into our first objection, we can see that the simple fact that the Bible is written by man is enough for me not to trust it. If man wrote it, I want nothing to do with it. There's a couple ways that this is taken. One is patriarchally, which is a simple refutation. Some feminists like to say, well, I don't trust anything done by man, meaning male. Okay, so all your textbooks as a kid that gave you the knowledge to come up with the idea that you don't trust anything by man, how does that work out, right? So that would be my first question to that is I'm going to go right after the male thing if it's in that situation. If they're saying man is humanity, that's what I actually want to address tonight. Does that make sense? That, remember in apologetics, we don't ever want to assume what they mean. We want to go into the question, well, what do you mean by man? Well, I mean humanity, and that's what I'm assuming in tonight's topic. If they said, well, I mean maleness, it was patriarchal males that wrote the Bible to, do this X, Y, and Z, I'd say, well, so do you distrust what about science books? They are written by men, males. There are females that write them, but so are all the science books written by males wrong? Stephen Hawking's book's wrong. He's the smartest man alive. So do we distrust astrophysiology now only because Stephen Hawking was a man? What about your doctor? If his textbook was written by a male, would you not let him do surgery on you? Because obviously he's going to use the same exact technique to remove your appendix as a female doctor would reading a book written by a female doctor. But because this one was written by a man, do you not trust him now? See how silly this argument gets? Gender has no basis on truth. So that's how I would approach this. But now if we're talking about humanity, well, we're going to look at our first response. And let me go here. So, can we trust anything that man has written? And that's kind of what I was getting at about there for, going down the male thing. Because in history, predominantly everything was written by men. And then females started writing based off of what men wrote, which means the first book written by a female was based off of what a male wrote, so therefore everything females write cannot be trusted by this logic. Now, we all know that this is bad logic, but their assumption is bad, and that's why we point this out. Next, how could you trust your own thoughts since those came from man? Now, this is in the sense of humanity, right? Because they're saying, well, humans wrote the book, we can't trust humans. Okay, well, if we can't trust humans, how can you trust your own thoughts then? And if your own thoughts are saying that you can't trust the Bible, how can you trust that those thoughts are true? You see the problem with we're not really getting evidential yet. This is more philosophical, and I'm putting my mom to sleep. See, this is what nobody knows, and this is what I've been learning like the last few times preaching and all this stuff. I get to see everybody's face. But the statement's self-defeating. What about historical documents? Are historical writings really trustworthy? They are written both by genetic males and human males, right? Or humanity in that sense. And so we can see that, first off, humans do make errors. That is true. But it's bad thinking to think that everything humans write will be wrong. Just like the doctor that studies a medical textbook, it's been checked over and over, and it's going to have correct stuff in it, right? So just saying, well, a human wrote this, therefore it's wrong, the conclusion doesn't follow the premise. They have a priori already kicked out the Bible being trustworthy just based off of bad arguments. Does that make sense? Before they are given any knowledge, they're coming up with ideas of why they can't trust the Bible. But when we look in to see if something's trustworthy, we look at criteria. Are there multiple witnesses attesting to the truth? And in the case of the Bible, we have multiple witnesses. Everybody thinks the Bible's one book. It's actually the whole Bible is read by 40 different authors from Genesis to Revelation. The New Testament, each gospel is written by a different writer. Paul wrote the majority of the epistles, but we also have some other writers such as Jude and Peter. And then we have John writing some other epistles. But we have multiple eyewitnesses that are all kind of confirming each other, and they're written at different times and places in a way that they could not corroborate with each other. And then independent attestation, and that's what I mean by independent. They're apart from each other. They're not all in the same place at the same time. John's not writing his Gospel of John going, hey, Mark, what did you write? Mark's like, I said he died on the cross. Okay, I'll put that too. They're not doing that. Mark probably wrote his Gospel as early as 45 AD, probably around Jerusalem. John wrote his Gospel somewhere between 90 and 100 AD, probably around Ephesus. They probably weren't talking to each other. Maybe John could have had a copy of Mark, but the way his gospel writes is highly unlikely, especially since he was imprisoned. Embarrassing details. Look, if I'm trying to convince you of something, I'm not going to tell you I'm a fool, right? Jesus says nobody knows the time nor the hour, not the Son. Jesus just said, I don't know everything. That's kind of embarrassing. Now, there's a fuller context to this passage, and if I was to give a sermon on it, I would explain that. But right now I'm talking as the Bible as a written manuscript, not infallible or authoritative, just telling a story. That comes across as a little embarrassing for somebody saying, I'm the Son of God, and I don't know everything. That's not something that you would put in to prove that he's the Son of God, but that's something that you would put in if it's true. And that's the difference. And that's something about the Bible, is it is uniquely true in that when you look at like the Vedas, which are Hinduism, or the Quran, which is Islam, or any of these other holy books, they are holy by their religion standard, not ours. They always kind of whitewash history and make it sound like so pleasant, like our martyrs, saints, and holy men were perfect. They did no wrong. Everything's great. Everything in our history is perfect. It's all fairies, tales, and rainbows. Yay! Okay, Lot slept with his sisters in the Bible, or with his daughters in the Bible. People are like, oh, that's gross. Yes, it's really gross, but it's true. Why would you put it in there unless it's true? That's so embarrassing. But it's true. Abraham tried to kill his son. Good dad. Yay, father of the year. Embarrassing, but true. Now, of course, if I was to preach a sermon on this, there's a point about this, because the first time the Bible says love, the word love, is when it says Abraham loved his son. And there's something about faith response in there, and we'll read about that in Romans as well. But these embarrassing details, you don't say this stuff unless it's true. And the New Testament, filled with them. Think about the Apostle Paul. He was running around killing Christians. How embarrassing is it to go, oops, I was wrong, I shouldn't have killed you. That's pretty embarrassing. You don't put that in unless it's true. And then dissimilarities. That's another thing, is, when we look at the women accounts of going to the tomb, right? One says some women, one says two Marys, one says Mary, Salome, and someone else, right? And everybody, what? The other Mary. So we have these dissimilarities. Now, some people say they're contradictions. They're not. They're all taken from different point of views. They can all line up where they all make sense. They're just dissimilar. But at the core, a group of women, which is, by the way, embarrassing in first century Israel, not saying anything bad about women. I'm just saying by their culture in that time, having women discover the tomb is empty and not Peter, It's very embarrassing. Peter was the leader. If I'm going to lie and make up a good story, I'm going to say that the leader of my group found the tomb empty. Peter found it empty. Now that's a good story. It's just not true. Women, untrustworthy women that you cannot trust according to rabbinic tradition, found the tomb empty. Who's going to start off their story with untrustworthy witnesses? Only the truth. But it's embarrassing, but it's true. And it's dissimilar because each person says, well, I think it was the two Marys, the Mary and the other Mary. Well, I think it was Mary Salome and the Mary. I think it was, but here's the truth is a group of women found the tomb empty. They're not contradictions. They all say a group of women found the tomb empty. And so there's no contradiction there. There's dissimilarities, and these are all marks of the truth. Now let's look at our next.
So in other words, if they all told the exact same story, then you'd kind of wonder, okay, did they get together and contrive this?
Yeah,
But by there being dissimilarities, little variances in it, their personality, what they saw in it, it really further just indicates that it is the truth because there are minor dissimilarities between them.
yeah, exactly. He asked about if the stories were exactly the same. One, we would only have one gospel because why write it 4 times?
Well, I watch a lot of detective shows, and the detectives, if they're interviewing this guy and they're interviewing this guy, and they say the exact same thing, they're weary about it.
Exactly. And in the military, when dealing with POWs, we operated under the 5 S's. Separate, silence, segregate, I forget the 4th one because it's been a while, and then speed to the rear. But notice I said separate. The reason we separate is we don't want them coming up with corroborating their stories. And, we want their stories to have small differences. That way we know that it's the truth. We actually have a member of our law community here. If you have 2 witnesses and they say the same exact thing, do the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? And he just said, you're lying. I don't believe a word you said. And it's like a car accident scene, right? If you have multiple witnesses at a car accident, let's say the truth of the matter is it's a red van and a blue truck that hit in the middle of an intersection. One witness might call it a brown van to the cops because brown's similar to red. One might be a car guy and go, well, it's a light blue F-150 4-wheel drive. He's going to be really detailed. The other person's going to be like, well, maybe they're not even a car guy. He might be like, well, it could have been a grayish, maybe SUV-ish truck, right? Notice I'm giving different details from different people based on different personalities. At the end of the day, grayish, bluish, truck, F-150, very detailed. Brown van, red van. These are all very dissimilar, but by each personal viewpoint. Maybe one person saw the truck head on, another person's looking from this way and they can't really see the truck because you're going to get different stories. That's to be expected. If everything is exactly the same, that's not how reality works. And when you read the Gospels, you get different stories because the apostles were looking at different areas. They weren't always, there was an inner circle with Jesus, there was an outer circle. Guess what? Matthew, he was the outer circle. He was an inner circle. John was inner circle. Should Matthew and John sound anything alike? No, they shouldn't. But they overlap a lot, which says, hey, this is kind of true. Now, why would the Gospels, when they were written 2,000 years ago, or why would we trust the Gospels when they were written 2,000 years ago? And we're almost out of time. So I'm going to answer this first, see what anybody would say. Why would we trust the Gospels when they were written 2,000 years ago? All right, nobody's proved them wrong in 2,000 years.
Because we continue to find fragments that back up that they are exactly the way they were.
Because we continue to find fragments. Who's the oldest person in the room? All right. We'll go with Monty. Monty, you're the oldest person in the room. Let me ask you this. How many fingers do you have on both of total on your hands right now? Yes, counting your thumbs. You have 10 fingers. Was that true on the day that you were born? Okay. So, here's my point. Does truth change over time? No. Do you see the problem with this argument now? Why would we trust the Gospels when they were written 2,000 years ago? Well, they were true the day they were written. They are true today. Truth doesn't change based on time. And that's just a bad assumption. Just like Monty was born with 10 fingers, that's true, minus any catastrophic accidents, he's going to have 10 fingers today. That's true. Truth doesn't change over time. Truth, it's not like it's degradable or something. Like, truth is truth. Was the sky blue 2,000 years ago? Yes. Why? Because the sky is blue. That's truth. Is there 24 hours in a day? Approximately. Yes, that's true. Was that true 2,000 years ago? Yes. Why? Because it's true that there's approximately 24 hours in a day. It's just that simple. Truth doesn't change because time's added in. It's just a weird argument that people make. Well, I can't trust them because they're old. Huh. So, okay, well, in that case, all of our knowledge is built off of old knowledge, like, Julius Caesar, the Roman Empire. That's really old knowledge. So are we just going to stop trusting that too? No, because it's true, And so I'm going to go ahead and stop there. We'll pick up next week with we don't even know who wrote them, which is actually a very good argument. And I love going into depth on this one. And so this is where we're going to start getting some real good depth into these arguments. So it's been a pleasure, and we'll get into our prayers. And so we'll turn that off. And as he goes back there, if anybody that is watching, if you have any questions, always feel free to email them to the church email address, and Bailey will get them either to Ken or myself. So I'll throw that one out there.